Hello back, everyone. Let's move on with the story for another 20 minutes. So, we came up to the point where the two families realized what the feud between the two astronomers was about. So, that was the reason for the idiotically vehement feud. Just as they were about to create even closer bonds of friendship, a meteor come between those two old pals. A shooting star, an asteroid, an aerolite, just a stone. Alright, it was a pretty big stone, but in any case, it was stumbling block over which Jenny and Francis' wedding procession was in serious danger of tripping. And Lou couldn't help cussing like a boy. To hell with that meteor, and ditto with the whole solar system. Time went by. April gave way to May. Mutually agreed upon wedding date was 25 days off. But God only knew what might go wrong in the interim, what drastic developments might occur. The complications might toss a monkey wrench into the two families' plans. So far, this disgraceful feud had been kept behind closed doors, but what if some unexpected circumstance brought it out into the open? What if the two rivals were publicly pitted against each other? Yet the wedding preparations did go forward. Everything would be ready by the 25th of the month, even Miss Lou's gorgeous gown. It's important to note that the first week of May featured atrocious weather. Wind, rain, and the sky swept with endless piles of huge clouds. You couldn't see either the sun, which by then was soaring fairly high above the horizon, or the moon, which was nearly full and should have been lighting up the whole firmament. So any serious sky watching was out of the question. Interestingly, Mrs. Huddleston, Jenny, and Francis never dreamt of complaining, and even Lou, who usually hated when it was wet and windy, was ecstatic over the continuing bad weather. If only it lasts till the wedding, she kept saying. Over the next 3 weeks, I don't want to see the sun, the moon, or one single star. And that's how it went. To the endless annoyance of the two astronomers in their towers and heartfelt satisfaction of their families. But this state of things couldn't last forever, and the weather improved during night of May 8th to 9th. A north wind drove away all the clouds cluttering the air, and once again the heavens were perfectly clear. Up in their respective observation decks, then Forsyth and Dr. Huddleston went back to scouting the sky over Weston from its far edges to its zenith. Would the meteor make another pass in front of their telescopes? Would they be lucky enough to sight it again? And which of the two would be the first to spot it? One thing was certain, their attitude hadn't changed an iota. Iota means a very small number. Also, it is the name of a very interesting cryptocurrency project, which is an idea far more advanced than Bitcoin and blockchain. Um, okay, I digress. One thing was certain: their attitudes hadn't changed an iota, and if their moods were equally wild, it was because their skywatching was so fruitless that they weren't sure they would ever see that meteor again. But a last minute news item appeared in the papers on May 9th that tackled this issue. The item read, Friday night at 10:47 p.m. A shooting star of amazing size moved across the northern part of the sky at high speed, heading from northeast to southwest. This time, neither Fawcett nor Huddleston had seen the meteor. Haha! But it didn't make any difference. They were positive the shooting star was the same they described to the two observatories. At last, the one exclaimed. Finally, exclaimed the other. So you can understand how delighted they were the next day and also how irritated when the newspapers gave fuller accounts of the as follows. According to staff at Pittsburgh Observatory, they first heard of the shooting star on April 9th from a Mr. Dean Fawcett of Weston, and according to staff at the Cincinnati Observatory, they were told of it on the same day by one Dr. Stanley Huddleston, also Boston. Alright, let's see. Chapter 6, which contains a variety of colorful tidbits on meteors in general and on particular shooting star whose discovery was a bone of contention between Mr. Fawcett and Huddleston. So I believe that this chapter is going to be a sort of scientific description of, kind of a backstory of what we need to know about this shooting star. Should I continue about that? I think it is important. So, let's do this fast. I cannot wait for you guys to hear the part of the story where the protagonist enters. Haha! None of these two astronomers are the protagonist. So, if ever there was a geographic region to make a continent proud as a father would be of one of his children, it was North America. If ever there was a nation to make North America proud, it was the United States. If ever there was a state out of the 51 represented on its star-spangled flag to make the USA proud, it was Virginia, and with its capital in Richmond. If ever there was a city on the Potomac to make Virginia proud, it was Boston. And if ever one of its citizens could have made all Boston puff out its chest, it was on the occasion of this sensational discovery that was sure to rank high in the achievements of 20th century astronomy. Aside from the countless daily, twice weekly, twice monthly, and monthly news publications flourishing in the United States, you could readily imagine that it was the local Boston papers that issued the most glowing reports on Dean Fawcett and Dr. Huddleston, at least early in the game. Didn't these two illustrious townspeople reflect glory on the whole city? What citizen wouldn't want to share in this? Wouldn't the name Boston be inextricably linked to this discovery? Wouldn't it be recorded in the municipal archives along with the names of these two astronomers to whom the whole scientific world owed so much? So don't gasp in surprise, dear reader, and take my word for it when I tell you that the very same day swarms of loudly enthusiastic Bostonians headed over to the two houses on Morris Street and Elizabeth Street. Needless to say, none of them knew about the rivalry between Fawcett and Huddleston. These delirious townspeople simply lumped the two men together. They couldn't have cared less about their private differences. Their two names would be connected for years to come, and in future millennia. Wouldn't historians maybe claim that this discovery had really been made by just one man, somebody with hyphenated moniker of Fawcett Huddleston? But one thing was for sure. In response to the cheering throngs, Dean Fawcett and Dr. Stanley Huddleston were obliged to make separate appearances on their respective observation decks. They bowed to acknowledge the roaring crowds. Yet a close observer would have noticed that their faces didn't wear expressions of unalloyed delight. A shadow was passing over their triumphs like a cloud across the sun. Each man kept casting sideways glances at his competitor's watchtower. Each knew that his rival was also receiving the public's acclaim. Their telescopes had already where are we? But I've lost the line. Their telescopes had already told them so. And if those spyglasses could have been loaded cannons, who knows? They just might have opened fire to each other on each other. Their eyes held such sheer concentrated jealousy. They didn't simply look daggers; they looked bullets. Even so, Dean Forsyth was applauded just as heartily as Dr. Huddleston, and vice versa, by the same townsfolks parading in front of both homes. And while these ovations were causing uproars in their two neighborhoods, what was going on with Francis Gordon, the old housekeeper, Mrs. Mitz, Mrs. Huddleston, Jenny, and Lou? Did they have any inkling of the dismal consequences soon to come from this press releases by Pittsburgh and Cincinnati observatories? The secret was out now. Working separately, Forsyth and Dr. Huddleston had discovered a shooting star at the exact same moment. So it was obvious that they were dealing with an identical meteor. Furthermore, if the two men laid separate claims to the honor, if not the rewards of this discovery, was that? Furthermore, if the two men laid separate claims to the honor, if not the rewards, of this discovery, couldn't it lead to embarrassing scandal for both families? It isn't hard to imagine and understand the feelings of Mrs. Huddleston and Jenny while those crowds were carrying on in front of their home. The two of them watched it all through the window curtains, since the doctor had already put in an appearance on the observation deck. They were spared having to go out on the balcony of their room. With sinking hearts, they imagined the consequences of the reports in the newspaper. If out of their silly jealousy, Forsyth and Dr. Huddleston kept quarreling over the meteor, the public wouldn't just stand back and stay impartial. Both men would have their supporters, and during all turmoil around town, during all the disorder around, that was likely to ensue, think what could happen to the two families and to the engaged couple. A modern day Romeo and Juliet, caught up in a feud between the scientific Montague and Capulets of this U.S. city. Okay, I believe that Montague and Capulet must be characters of some mythical story, if I'm not mistaken. I'm really clueless about this. Lou was livid. She wanted to throw her window open. She wanted to scream to the entire town. She was sorry she didn't have a hose handy to spray the whole crowd and drown their cheering with a blast of cold water. Lou's mother and sister would have had a rough time, reigning in righteous wrath. It was the same over at Elizabeth Street. The revelers were about to aggravate an already strained situation, and Francis Gordon would gladly have doomed the whole lot of them to the eternal bonfire. At first, he intended to go up beside his uncle, but he didn't, afraid that he wouldn't be able to hide his irritation. So he left Forsyth and Omicron strut round on the deck by themselves. And just as Mrs. Huddleston needed to restrain Lou's impulsiveness, Francis likewise had to curb the temper of old Mrs. Mitz. She wanted to sweep the streets clean of those crowds and domestic implement and the domestic implement she wielded with such expertise could have done major damage. And the domestic implement she wielded with such expertise could have done major damage. Still and all, it seemed a tad harsh to greet well-wishers with wax from a broom, and Francis felt obliged to intervene in his uncle's best interest. But Mr. Francis, the old housekeeper exclaimed, listen to that racket. They're going honest to goodness crazy. Sure seems like it, Francis agreed. And all because of some oversized pebble wandering around in the clouds. You're right, Mrs. Mitz. And if it wants to fall out of the sky and smack half a dozen of them on the head, it's fine with me. What are those shooting stars good for anyway, I ask you? For starting feuds, Francis concluded. While the cheers reached a fever pitch outside, and if this discovery really had so much glory associated with it, why weren't the two old friends willing to share it? Their two names could be attached to the meteor till the end of time. Otherwise, there were no material advantage in it, no monetary benefits. It was strictly for the honor of the thing. But when it's a point of personal pride, when vanity gets stirred into the mix, there's no way you can talk sense of the two fellows who were stubborn, so stubborn they must have been descended from old Aliboran. Aliboran. Where's this? Alright. Honestly now, just what was so glorious about sighting this meteor? Wasn't a discovery simply a matter of luck? Wasn't it a sheer accident that it had crossed Waston's horizon at the exact moment when the Enforced and Stanley Hodgson just happened to be squinting into the eyepieces of their instruments? And anyhow, day and night, don't these shooting stars, asteroids, and aerolites pass overhead by the hundreds, by the thousands even? And haven't other observers beside our two amateurs spotted the light trail of these flying objects as they streak through the space? Is it even possible to count how many of these balls of fire scooting along their erratic trajectories in the dark depths of the firmament? Experts say 600 million meteors enter the Earth's atmosphere in one night, 1.2 billion during daytime, and according to Newton, 10 to 15 millions of these heavenly bodies are potentially visible to the naked eye. So if these two discoverers have made discovery the astronomers haven't, big deal. This last sentence was a wrap-up of an article in the Waston Punch, which was the only newspaper to take humorous view of the things and which never missed a chance to display its usual irrelevance. The competition took things more seriously, turning the occasion into a parade of enough scientific knowledge, cribbed from the American equivalents of La Roche's Encyclopedia, to inspire envy in professionals at the most renowned observatories. So here's a quote, I believe, of that newspaper. Kepler believed, said the Boston Daily Standard, the shooting stars were of terrestrial origin, but it seemed more likely that these phenomena really do come from the outer space. Alright, I'm down to the 20-minute mark. See you tomorrow. Stay safe. Stay patient.